Welcome to a Canopy interview. My name is Michael Zarathis Cook. I'm the chief editor of this publication. We've been doing interviews now for the last 5 years, since August of 2020. And one of the things that I realized as we were putting together this upcoming issue, which will be issue 16, I realized that we've never actually interviewed a comedian, which is a bit ridiculous for two reasons. Number one, stand-up comedy it is as high stakes of a performing art as you can get. It's up there with, theater or the one person theater show. So there's no reason why, for the last 5 years, we shouldn't have spoken to at least one comedian and captured this art form on our platform. And then personally, stand-up comedy is one of my favorite art forms. I follow it closely, especially, the comedy scene in New York, LA, Austin, etc. So, I was just scratching my head. Why the hell have we not interviewed a stand-up comedian? So naturally, I went looking for who I would love to be the inaugural comic on Canopy. And it wasn't someone that I've known for many years or have been following, but rather a comedian that I just discovered over the last year or so. The comedian by the name of Cauvin. The JL stands for Jean-Louis. And I wanted to be him for various reasons. Number one, he's very, very funny, incredibly intelligent, and he sort of made his name doing these Trump impressions right around the same time that our magazine started in 2020, right at the onset of the pandemic. And recently, this year in April, he came to Toronto and he recorded a special, a live taping of a special called Trump versus Canada. And it was a great show. You'll hear all about it in the interview you're about to listen to. That recording, that live taping is now available on his YouTube channel as like a free special that you can watch. So alongside listening to this truly great conversation, please go and check out that special. It's called Trump versus Canada. You can find it on the JL Cauvin YouTube channel. And we're going to link to it as well in the piece that we've written alongside this interview. At the time of me recording this, the viewership on YouTube of that special is around 180,000, which is fantastic. I would love if our coverage here can push it over the 200,000 mark. So please honor JL's time and honor this fantastic interview that he gave us by checking out that special. I promise you, it's unlike anything you've seen, both in the stand-up comedy sphere of things, just because of the way he approaches crowd work, etc. But it's also unlike anything you've seen when it comes to impersonating Trump. I won't say anything further than that because we get really into it in this conversation. But Jill's all over the place, like as a person, as a creative, and as a professional. He also happens to be an attorney in the Bronx. So he's got a full-time, recently has a full-time job as a lawyer. So we also get into that. We get some of his perspective from that aspect of his life. But the main thing that we talked about in this conversation is this idea of the sort of diametric opposition, the opposing forces between art and algorithms. You'll see it over and over, and there are many different ways that people complain about this, either artists or quote unquote content creators, etc. People who put things on the internet. You're at the mercy of algorithms. You're completely at the mercy of what setting any particular platform, be it X or Instagram or whatever the case may be, or YouTube, they can turn you on in terms of your availability to the broader audience or the audience that subscribes to you. At any point, they can also turn you off and you are no longer visible. So I wanted to use JL as a case study of why it's super important that we build other channels that don't rely entirely on the algorithm of basically a handful of platforms, right? There are just about 5 platforms that people rely on to get their message out there. That's exactly what we're doing here with Canopy, by the way. I don't push this on, I don't push our platform at all on any platforms that run on algorithms. That's why our newsletter service is incredibly important. There is no algorithm that decides whether or not you're going to open an email in your inbox. And when you open it, we're not competing with the TikTok reel. It's just a matter of, do you want to read what we've put in front of you or not? And by the way, if you do want to read it, if you're enjoying, first of all, I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. It's one of the best ones we've had in this issue. We had a lot of great conversations putting this issue together, but this is definitely one of my favorite ones. So I know you're going to enjoy it. But if you're tuning into what we're doing here on a regular basis, please consider becoming a subscriber. It's just $5 a month. It supports the work that we do and allows us to continue to be independent. This is a completely self-funded enterprise. So your $5 goes a long way for the work that we do with our writers, illustrators, et cetera, et cetera. Keep it super simple. Don't even think about it. Just subscribe, $5 a month. If you change your mind later, please don't. But don't overthink it, because our ability to continue doing this relies entirely on your ability to find it valuable and then to reward that value with support. I hope you enjoy this. It's a really great conversation. I think I'll just end by saying quickly that one of the things that I also appreciate about JL, and I hope it comes through in this conversation, is he reminds me, I kind of think of him as like the Kelly Reichardt of comedy. Now, you might not, Kelly Reichardt is she's a filmmaker, she's a director, an American director, and she is incredibly prolific and commercially successful as well. But she's not really a part of Hollywood. Like, she makes these films that deliver view and like storytelling films about America that you just wouldn't see in Hollywood. Her films are really hard to describe, but they, in a weird way, they feel like they show you what the real America is. I guess I also bring her up because she's just released a film called The Mastermind that we will be covering in this issue, and we're currently working on putting together an interview with her. So this is also me putting it out into the ether and making sure that interview happens, etc. But what I appreciate about Kelly Reichardt, and a lot of people appreciate about her, is also what I'm hoping you tap into with this interview and with JL Cauvin as an artist, as a comedian, as a person in general, that he, through stand-up comedy, delivers a view of America that, is not typical for your New York comic, or that sort of coastal view or bi-coastal view of the States. It feels like he's tapped into an understanding of America as it is, as it will be looked back on decades from now. So, I think part of it is also, yes, he's commercially successful and commercially viable, but like Kelly Reichardt, the industry isn't necessarily pushing his stuff. The industry doesn't really support it and champion him. So he kind of relies on people just getting it and then supporting what he does. So enjoy this interview, and folks, just remember to subscribe, share it. Most importantly, become a paid subscriber and support the work that we do here. All right. JL, thanks again for doing this. I suspect that a lot of folks that are listening to this have not heard of you, especially in Canada and Toronto. Has less to do with you and more to do with just the type of art that we've covered. You're the first comedian that we've interviewed for our magazine. But I thought, just to give people a quick run through of the JL experience, I could just do a quick background, where you're coming from, where you are now, and more, I think, interestingly, where you're going with your career. So I'm going to go a little bit way back. In your early career, you worked as an assistant district attorney in the Bronx, and then you left law in the early 2000s to pursue comedy full time. I'm kind of pausing a little bit as I'm going through this, because if I get things wrong, I'm hoping you'll just jump in there and be like, "What?"
Oh, sure. No, so far you're right.
Okay, but things really took a turn in terms of a breakout in 2020.
Yes.
With your impressions and impersonations of Donald Trump, which drew tens of millions of views across platforms. And I say that, number one, to toot your horn, because you deserve it. But then to contrast
with where you are now, which isn't to say that a fall from grace or anything of that sort, but I think this contrast is important for the conversation we're about to have. You're back now as an attorney in the Bronx. Pause for correction, none.
Correct.
You've been, and what I like about that is you've been really, really clear-eyed about the de-evolution of your career in comedy and stand-up comedy, because to go from millions of views, making hundreds of thousands of dollars impersonating as a comedian in the height of the pandemic, et cetera, to a job that I think now is more meaningful and probably does better for society. But I'm happy to disagree with that. But it's a 9 to 5 job, more or less, and I'm sure it's actually 8 to 7 in real terms. A lot of people would sort of just bury their inner voice about that de-evolution of a career that they were really excited for, and perhaps until recently was really excited for. But people who listen to your podcast, follow your writing, or just know about you in general can attest to how clear-eyed you have been, and you've thought about it. You've spoken about this process that's really unfortunate. But before I get into all of that, maybe I know I'm going to try my best to keep this to 30 minutes like I asked for, but could you give like a cliff notes of what the last 5 years has looked like for you, I don't know, since April 2020 to where we
Sure.
are now?
Sure. I'll take it back if I can to 2019. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. I'll take it back to 2019. The reason that's an important year is I'd been doing stand-up at that point for about 15 or 16 years. And I had prioritized it for about a decade. And I had had a couple TV credits. I had been a regular on one of the biggest podcasts at the time, Adam Carolla's show. I had gotten some stuff played on ESPN radio, all unrepresented, solo practitioner, if you will. But I never broke through. Like in 2018, I had my financially best year as a comedian up until that point. And I'd say half of my bills, half of my income was comedy. Half of my bills were paid with comedy. And I was proud of that, but it's not enough to dedicate your sort of full time and energy to make half the money you need to live. And in 2019, a job offer from a law firm just came out of the blue, really big firm, great money, great benefits. And I just turned 40. And I sort of said, you know what? Comedy's been wearing me down steadily for the last decade. I've had some bumps. I've put out some good albums, some podcasts, but it's like, I can no longer make it the priority. I won't quit entirely, but it can't be the thing that defines when I go on vacation, how much money I have, where I can go on date. Like it had I had to put something else first. And so I took the job at the firm. 6 months later, the pandemic hits and I'm making a couple of videos, very bored as Donald Trump. I developed an impression and had been doing a podcast once a week for a couple of years as Trump. And it had, like 500 listens a week, enough to be like, well, it's more people than I know. So at least I'm reaching beyond my immediate circle. And then I did a random video on March 20th. March 20th? Wow, how have I already forgotten the day? Well, I think it was March 20th, 2020. March 24th, sorry. I've got to know my own origin story better. And it blew up. This video just blew up like nothing I've ever done. And it was truly an overwhelming feeling because I had, through a long process that you were alluding to, the second time I've gone through this process, a sort of resignation, but I was okay with it. That comedy was not going to be the career for me. I had some accomplishments. If I ever had kids, I could be like, look, daddy was on TV. I had some respect of some more successful peers. So there's nothing for me to hold my head down. And it didn't seem like it was happening. The grind had reached its peak for me. And so in 2020, when this video blows up, I'm getting followed and retweeted by celebrities. I'm getting interviewed by major publications. Throughout that year, really, I just reached a mass of people and made more money, as a comedian in 2020 and 2021 than I'd ever made as a lawyer in any 2-year period. But I was also still working remotely as a big firm lawyer because I was afraid to put my eggs in the comedy basket because I'd been burned before, thinking that it was quote unquote my time. And so, but then I ended up getting a role on the show Billions, out of the blue, because the creator of the show was a big fan of what I was doing online. So I didn't play myself. He cast me as like a character in one episode, and it was a pretty meaty role for somebody who's really never done any acting. Um, and then I filmed a special in 2022 that is, the best stand-up special I've ever done. And I really thought in 2022 was the year where I was like, I really think my dreams are going to come true after really just coming to a sane, healthy conclusion that comedy as hobby, comedy as passion pursuit didn't have to end, but comedy as career was over. Now, all of a sudden, I have every reason to believe comedy career is not just it's not going to happen, it's happening. And a series of a few things that may sound like sour grapes or bitterness, but they're just facts. Um, Without getting into what happened with the special, because there was a whole issue around that. It eventually came out, and I'm very proud of it. It's on Amazon Prime. But when Donald Trump got kicked off of Twitter, this is how sort of oddly insignificant this sounds, because it's like, but you've reached so many people, you have so many subscribers, you have so much of this. When Donald Trump got kicked off of Twitter after January 6th, um, whatever they did to the algorithm completely shut out my account, as if I was right. I was parodying the man, but it was almost like our DNA was, chimpanzee and human, so similar that the algorithm didn't discern a parody of Trump to Trump and right-wing misinformation. And in February of 2021, my Twitter account, which had been the driving force, I picked up a lot of YouTube subscribers also, which was great. But my Twitter account, which had really been the driving force to my unexpected explosion, froze. I was gaining 10,000 followers a month for like 9 straight months. I had never had a net positive month on Twitter in the 4.5 years since they kicked Trump off. There's no place to appeal. And then you end up, now I've started to build up a little bit of a Facebook and Instagram following because I'm playing the algorithm game. I am, as you're fairly familiar with my work, but I'm a pretty varied performer and writer. I have a lot of stand-up, 8 stand-up albums, a lot of Trump material, but also a lot of other impressions as well. And then just sometimes I want to write serious or humorous things. And I kind of was hoping, my philosophy was, when I struck gold in 2020, it was to prove that I wasn't a one-hit wonder. I kept feeding that Trump stuff because I was good at it, and that's what was in demand. So I don't want to act like I was, oh no, 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 I'm a Shakespearean actor. I can't do that Trump stuff anymore. No. I was happy to feed the new fans the things they'd grown to really enjoy. But I am somebody with a good amount of developed comedy skill and talent, and a very, very large body of work that I felt like, oh, if I can show people that I'm a kind of renaissance man of comedy and that they've been missing out on all this good stuff, and I'm going to keep feeding them more and more and more, I'll build up a fan base that's like untouchable, and will sustain me and support me. And we can have this, now I'm producing material for hundreds of thousands or millions of people, and they're giving me that love back, and that relationship can grow fruitfully for my art, my bank account, and for your enjoyment, and consumption. And after 2021, it just froze. Like it just, I hit some sort of peak out of my control. And to this day, I will get people who will write to me and say, I thought you quit comedy. I thought something had happened. And I go, it's always been there. And you have been so conditioned. The fans, I think, have been so conditioned. It's a two-way street. The algorithm shut me out, but the algorithm has conditioned consumers and fans to sort of just assume I can be very passive now in my experience with art and other people's work. And it will just show me. And if that person doesn't if I'm not shown that person's work, I will just assume they're not making it or that something happened. And there's obviously a very easy way to check that. You can check my account and see that I'm posting stuff every day. You can check my website, but people are so conditioned to like trust algorithms and social media websites that we all say are terrible and conditioning us for things and taking away sort of independent thought, and but yet we still seem to buy into it. And then I'm left going, no, I did two specials and was on billions since you last saw me. I wish you had just done a little bit of research if the algorithm was hiding me. Because when you say, and I'm sorry for rambling, but if you say, hey, follow me on other sites or sign up for my newsletter. But if you're already not seeing me because of the algorithm, then you're sort of just on a deserted island, hoping a ship comes by and takes interest in you. Versus, I used to have all these fans. Where did they go? Why don't they engage the way I engaged when I am a fan of someone or something?
That is a perfect summary because again, I want to respect the folks who are new to you, and I hope you're gaining new fans from this. And folks that are listening, stick with me here because you're probably wondering, why should I care except from, just more comedy the better about a comedian from the Bronx and the impact of the algorithm on the last 5 years of his career. But a short answer to that is I went to JL, I went to your show in Toronto back in April of this year, which was
That
titled
special comes out tonight. It
Tonight,
comes out tonight on my YouTube. It looks
which is
beautiful.
fantastic. Yeah, and I was like, the timing could not have worked out better. I promise I won't keep you too long, JL. I'm serious about that, so that you can attend to the business of making sure that everything runs out smoothly. And just while we're on this topic, if people want to watch that special, what's the best way to do that? And is there a way that makes you more money?
Oh, it's only on YouTube. So if you watch it on YouTube, it's when the ads come on, go get a beverage, let the ad play. But if you don't
Yeah.
let the ad play, that's fine too. But
Okay.
it's on my YouTube channel. It's Trump versus Canada is the title, and it's I don't really care. Canada has been very good to me in my few visits there, a lot better than America has been. And some people think of that as like, well, America doesn't like what you do. No, no, America does. There's plenty of people who like what I do in America, but Canada maybe is full of old school comedy fans who just stay abreast of the things they like. And in America, we let the algorithm wash over us and take us where it wants us to go. But on my YouTube channel, totally free, Trump versus Canada. It's as good as the show was and as happy as I was with that whole trip to Toronto, it looks even better.
Incredible. And I'll make sure I include a link to that video when we publish this digitally. And I think there's a portion of this that maybe some of the algorithms or algorithmic blocks on your content that happens in the States has not yet made its
Right.
way over to Canada, which sounds like a ridiculous thing to say because they're
No, I think that's probably what happened, because the idea of me selling 170 tickets on a Wednesday in Toronto and me only being able to sell 50 tickets on a Friday in Chicago doesn't really make sense unless I'm not being shown to my own sort of, if you're trying to suppress Trump content, and it's just odd because Elon Musk obviously took over Twitter years ago now, but nothing ever got reconfigured. But if you looked at a chart, it looks like my career ran into a brick wall in February of 2021. But you don't really care if Canada sees Trump stuff. You don't care if Europe or Australia sees Trump stuff. It's world entertainment. It's politics in another country. But in America is where you'd want to sort of stifle the reach of fake right-wing misinformation. And it's just, if democracy had been saved and it cost me my career, you know what? In the grand scheme of things, that's good. But look where we are. Look where
it's
we
not been
are.
saved.
It,
It's not
it,
been
it, it
saved.
served absolutely no purpose.
Yeah.
Trump has never been winning more, destroying more, and yet I'm like the shackles are somehow still on my comedy.
Great. And at this point, I'll pause for a bit of background, Jail, because I think you overestimate how much people in real life put you and Trump in the same bucket. I think you've talked about this in the past. that one look at you and people will think he's a Trump guy or like you're pro-Trump. The reason your comedy works so well and the reason you absolutely destroyed that room in the Yuck Yucks, it was Yuck Yucks, right? In April in Toronto was because like it, first of all, there's sheer raw talent there, which is the number one reason why I want to have this conversation. Because when I went to a show like that and I saw people leaving and they all had this look on their face of part exhaustion and part like we've just witnessed a legitimate miracle. Like there's nothing trumps that. And this is not just to heap praises on you, but I really want to get this across to the listener that the thought that I had leaving my mind, the thought of my mind when I was leaving that show is if this guy can't gather an audience consistently to make a living off of his art without selling out and relying entirely on his talent, who the hell out there, being a musician, a poet, a painter, a filmmaker, if this case study can't make a living as an artist, what are we doing as a society? So that's the background of this conversation. But it really, like, the look people had on their faces leaving that, because it was a 2-hour boxing match between you and the audience, no script, most of it was off the dome. But the reason your Trump impersonation works so well is because I figure you have some sort of an antibody against Trump. You're on the left. I think we probably should have said that earlier in this conversation for the folks that tuned out because Trump was mentioned. You're on the left. You're a Democrat, more or less. But
No. More. Just I'm a left of center, proud Democrat. If you know your American history, you'll know every good thing that people want to preserve in their lives was probably in America was probably something that a Democrat president signed into law with a Democratic Congress. But now we run on sort of Joe Rogan vibes of faux masculinity, and we've got Trump.
And I want to come back to this. I'm keeping an eye on your time, but I really do want to talk about the political thing briefly in an abbreviated sense. But yes, thanks for clarifying that. You are indeed on the left, but a lot of times, especially comedians that are on the left, when they do an impression of Trump, they do a caricature of Trump, which misses an opportunity, because if you just do the real Trump, if you talk and gesture and respond to things the way Trump would, there's nothing more absurd and hilarious than that. Because it's one of the few times where you actually sit back and be like, here's a comedian that's doing this, and this comedian looks absolutely ridiculous up there doing it. Now, can you imagine if this comedian was president and they're like, oh, wait, that's exactly the world that we live in, where someone is tremendously absurd, and yet they're given the keys to what we used to know as the free world. So I don't know how you came up with that point of attack, because in 2020 it was a minefield of Trump impersonators. It's a bit less now because I think the saturation point has been reached. But you found a way to not even overdo the Trump, and just like, I don't know how to describe it. You just do it. And folks might as well go and watch the special, because that's the best way to encapsulate what we mean here. You don't overdo it. You don't undersell it. And you think and talk the way he does. But here's the beauty, and I promise I'll stop my praiseworthiness here.
Please don't.
Either I've seen this online, or I gotta admit I saw this at the Toronto show as well. There is usually one or two people who maybe didn't read the liner notes and think that you're an actual Trump guy, and they show up eager to do the, like, let's go Trump shtick, or they're just there for the wrong reasons, more or less. It's always nice, and I saw this in Toronto, seeing it turn, because as you're doing your impression, you then point out the flaws in his character and his reasoning and the way he sees the world, not by distance or caricature, but by just like, folks, this is what it really is. This is what you voted for. And it's funny seeing those one or two people in the audience realize that they're at the wrong show, or they're at the right show, but for the wrong reasons. Okay, question for you, because I don't want this to be a one-man thing where I'm doing all the talking here, but the recording of that show has been turned into a special which people can watch on YouTube. But one of the we've talked it up, and you appreciate now how great it is and how great it looks. But when that show was recording that night and that time period, you weren't too happy about, how do I say this? Good shows happening. And here's what I mean by that. You wrote a blog shortly after Toronto, or maybe while like immediately after Toronto. I'll quote
Probably on the train home.
exactly. And it encapsulates what we're talking about, this idea that it is almost impossible for an artist to make a living based on their talent. And you wrote, quote, I deteriorated into a foul mood, probably because of the reality that constantly hits me with my comedy career. I will not be the success I want to be, but I tasted a night of it in Toronto. And you go on to thank the city of Toronto. But while we're going to get into some depressing things about art, but how good did that night feel, at least while you were on stage, before the reality of how rarely you get to experience these things hit you off stage?
It was incredible. And it wasn't just the 6 Tim Hortons donuts that I had eaten. It I felt like, and I don't know if I wrote this, but this is how I felt, where it was like, as a stand-up comic, I know I'm very good. I know there are nights when I'm great. But if you had to classify me as a stand-up comic, somewhere between very good and great. But I don't think most people would not call me a great. But I've done it enough. I have enough of a wit, enough of a varied sort of perspective on things that I'm really good as a stand-up. But the Trump thing, what has frustrated me about it, because I feel like if I end my career, and most people who ever knew me of my comedy, if they even think of me as a one-hit wonder, that doesn't offend me, because the one hit became a huge hit that, just by even degrees of separation, looks like a one-hit wonder, even if I have these other very nice successes along the way. If you make a movie that makes $1 billion and you make 5 movies that make $80 million each, those movies were successful, but you'll be known for that $1 billion movie, and that there's no shame in that. What has bothered me is that I will never consider myself, nor will I ever be considered the greatest comedian of all time, but I am the best Trump person on the planet. When you factor in impression, improv, volume of material, sense of the man, voice, every factor that could go into it. And when you look at people who've made tons of money impersonating presidents, like, I believe my Trump material and impression, and they go hand in hand. You can't, like, the greatness of it is that it's both of those things, that it's not just somebody who reads a phone book and sounds like Trump. It's somebody who is in his mind, improving, riffing. I could live it if I had to, for a reality show, if need be. But I never got the Rich Little, or there were people, there was a guy, he passed away, but who did a phenomenal George W. Bush, who, was on the Tonight Show every week, made tons of money doing corporate gigs. I never got that. Like, if you want to be a one-hit wonder, then at least let me get paid and recognized like a one-hit wonder, if that's the fate. And what made Toronto so special to me is, I often will text my girlfriend on the way to gigs at this point. I used to be like butterflies in my stomach going on the road, like I was on a date with a woman I really liked. And I'm not exaggerating. Like, there was a joy, a curiosity, a newness. And then you get to a new level, and new clubs are having you in, and you're buzzing, because you're like, my God, like, everything about this is great. I'm moving up. I'm getting to where I want to be. And these are recognizable building blocks to the career and dreams that I have. But the Toronto show felt like every night should be like this. And I know that sounds maybe a little arrogant, but I have put in the work. I have gotten the millions of views. I have gotten the fans. I can do whatever is called upon in comedy: impression, sketch, stand-up, writing, whatever. that night felt, I'm sorry. And I said, I tell my girlfriend on the way to shows almost always now, why am I doing this? Like I am in a pre-show funk and a post-show funk almost every time. And that show in Toronto felt like, just like 2020 felt like when that blew up, I felt like finally I've earned this. I have earned this lucky opportunity because I am put in so much work and I'm damn good. So when luck happens, you know what they say, luck is opportunity and preparation or something. In that definition of luck, that show business definition of luck or sports definition of luck, I'd earned it. It was my time. And that Toronto show, even more so, because I had already become disillusioned again with comedy and my potential to have the career I wanted. I was that should have been in like the Rogers Center. And I'm not even like I'm not saying that because I'm that nobody was going to do what I did better. And nobody will do what I do better than what I did in that Toronto show and what I can do whenever I do these live shows, but I'm often doing them in front of like 40 people, 18 people. Like we just had to cancel a show in Queens because we had only sold 13 tickets in my hometown the night before the show. And then when they see this Toronto show, they'll have kind of a similar reaction to you, like, why isn't he? I don't understand why he's not selling tickets. This is like for the Trump era. There's nothing better. Toronto gave me for a night, fulfillment. It wasn't. It was happiness, of course, but it was. There's something satisfying as I get older that I don't get the, oh man, isn't this great? I get more of a, God, they recognized what I do the way I want to be recognized and the way I feel it should be. The work should be recognized. And I know there's no real separation from a comedian and his comedy, so I don't want to sound too pretentious calling it the work. But in a way it is, because sometimes for health reasons, you almost have to separate yourself from the work and yourself and say, I worked hard on that and they appreciate it the way I feel it should be appreciated. And that felt really, really good.
And I will bring up proof of why it would have sold out Rogers Center in a second. So that is not hyperbole. But when often you talk about this disillusionment with the misalignment between your career, the talent that you have innately, and then I think what's also equally important to point out with artists that are in the same situation as you is the amount of work and output. You have been the sort of relentlessness that you have been the sort of relentless creator that the algorithm elsewhere rewards. But often when you're talking about this disillusionment, you say it in passing, and this is actually why I wanted to have this conversation, that quote, art is dead. And I just thought, I wish JL would go 5 minutes longer on what he means by art is dead. So so I was like, okay, let's actually invite JL and have that conversation. And I think maybe the caveat there is um, uh, art is dead as we know it. Maybe if that helps it sound less grandiose and less great, like as the art that we grew up knowing, and for the artists listening to this, the art that you wanted to spend your life creating and sharing with the public, to what degree is it dead the way that we know it? But before we get to that, I want to go back to this thing of algorithm, because it doesn't get more opposed than those two things, art on one side and algorithm on the other, in terms of like just the mindset that you need to be in order to create art versus in order to serve the algorithm. And the proof that I was talking about with the Rogers Center earlier is that you have a clip from that Toronto show that I think someone in the audience, because it was an audience back and forth special. It was crowd work, but not in the way that it's done now. It was crowd work while you stayed in character and
Yeah, it was like a town. I would say it was like pitched as a town hall so that it isn't like, hey, what do you do, man? What do you do for a living? It was improv on my part completely. So it brought that element to it, but it was almost like a performance, but with the improv of a stand-up comedy night.
here's how it's even better than improv, improv slash crowd work, because a lot of times when comedians do crowd work, it's exactly that. It's low level volleys of like, yeah, what do you do? Are you from out of town? Blah, blah, blah. Who's this with you? It's the usual stuff. Um, what was cool about that night and just the way you do it is the audience actually enters into a character,
Mhm.
because you then had people in the audience pretending that they were members of the press, or, I think at one point everyone just started asking questions in terms of, Mr. President, what would you, so everyone in the audience also they were also doing crowd work. And I think, there are levels to this, but there's a bit where you do Trump, someone asked about tariffs, and this was right when those first tariffs were being levied on Canada and on Singapore, blah blah blah. It was a mess, and your response was not only funny, but it explained it better than any of the pundits, talking heads, and the I don't want to ruin it. I'm just going to stop there. Go watch the special. That clip that's about a minute long has 2.3 million views on YouTube.
Right. Right.
So Rogers Center would have been a low lift. Like, just the energy that you bring to these shows, that could easily translate to a stadium performance.
Right.
But I also bring up that number because the clip before that had 40,000 views and the clip after that had 38,000 views. How do you think these algorithms work such that
If I knew, with this conversation would be, how did JL bring art to conquering the algorithm instead
Yeah.
of how did algorithms slay art?
All right.
Yeah, I wish I knew. It's just, yep. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I expected, that was my expectation as well, that like that's an answer that's hard that's a question that's hard to answer. So I'll just ask it in a different way. The difference between content versus creativity, how does it contribute to the absolute shit show that an algorithm can make of someone's career?
It's, I think the algorithm, much like Trump, doesn't like diversity. It wants to pigeonhole you. It wants to make you predictable and consumable. When you go to McDonald's, they don't change the menu every day, and they get billions served. And this this may not apply to everybody. Obviously, I can only speak to my own struggles with sort of social media and posting content online. But it's, I think we're just in a very difficult place where, you know, you have to make a choice. If you are famous, if you are algorithm proof, whether it be Sebastian Maniscalco or Shane Gillis, or if you're Nate Bargatze, if you sell out arenas and have millions of fans, the algorithm, you've earned that. And now you kind of have a what's it called in the airport where you get to skip the line?
A fast pass?
Fast pass. You sort of have a fast pass. But if you're trying to earn your way through social media and you're trying to come up, it wasn't always like this in my own career, but now it feels like you've got to either hit on a current event algorithm, or you have to just stay in your lane that they've prescribed for you and keep feeding. You're now the Trump guy. I don't care if your Elon Musk impression is gold. You're the Trump guy. Like, your people don't want to see it. In fact, we won't even show your subscribers this new thing to let them decide if they want to see more from you. We've decided, that's the part that really bothers me more than anything. If you don't show me to strangers, that's one thing. But if 100,000 people have affirmatively chosen to be a fan and a follower of what I do, you could show them a little bit more than what they'd see if they weren't following me. If you only show them the thing that you'd probably show them anyway, if they weren't a self-selecting fan. So I think we're getting more and more. We're not at the end of this path, but I have seen it go from anything can blow up to like, follow these methods, follow these topics, and you too might get subscribers or followers or money. And to me, what I've always tried to do, you mentioned that I could have a kind of voluminous output. If you look at my career, I was putting out albums and videos before any of this stuff mattered, because I was doing it because that's what I loved doing. I didn't do it even. My mom asked me for the first half of my career, I'd be going to do sketches. I would be spending all of my money that I had outside of rent and necessities to pay an editor and like some comedians lunch money to do a sketch with me. If you look at like there's a playlist on my YouTube channel, I think called like JL Classic Sketches or something. And my mom would ask me repeatedly, but who are these for? And I would say, well, they're funny and I'm putting effort because one day if something catches the eye of somebody and maybe like a rising tide will lift all the JL video boats, I want to have good stuff out there, stuff that I'm proud of, stuff I think is funny, so that if it gets discovered, I've got this nice body of work. Me as a comedian, not as a creator, as a comedian, as an artist, if we're being a little pretentious. But now I feel like too many people get into at least comedy for the goal of like not wanting a day job or wanting easy money, finding some quick path to be viral. And then that leads to money. And then you'll worry about becoming an artist or having a point of view later. And I still approach it from, yes, I put out a lot of Trump videos, and I'd be lying if there wasn't, 10% of me that's like, well, this is what the algorithm wants. But I do such a good original job, and it is something I'm proud of, regardless of what every other person is trying to do with the internet. I can be very proud of what I've done, of the comedy work that I've put out, not trying to trigger the algorithm, but the way I approach the world, that I'm still doing it for art. Even if a little bit of me has to acknowledge and respect the algorithm is, sort of unforgiving and doesn't care. It used to be facts don't care about your feelings. Algorithms don't care about your feelings either. But I still do it when I do it for what makes me satisfied and laugh. And that I not still trying not to just be a tool of the machinery.
I really find that funny. Your mom saying, "Who's this for?" Which
And
was
she wasn't saying it, she wasn't as judgmental as maybe I made it sound, but she'd just sort of be like, because I was, the familiar story, I was a struggling comic, like frustrated. And, I would spend my money to make good videos because I wasn't trying to make hot reels for TikTok. Like, oh, look at that. Look at how cool this is. I was like, I'm funny and I have funny ideas and I want my ideas to look the best they can and for people to discover good work and think, wow, who did this? This is really funny. Not, I want to like, I always thought fame would come if my work got recognized, but I never did the work for fame, if that makes sense.
it makes a lot of sense. And again, that's why this conversation fascinates me, is that for 99% of human history where art has been publicly available for mass consumption, that is the setting that most creators have, that I can't do this work if I'm going directly for fame, but if I'm trying to make a living off of this, I need it to be good enough so that when it's discovered, it's fame worthy. I don't think we've appreciated enough as a culture, although we're beginning to, that how much that's no longer the case. How much that you can only make it and succeed if you absolutely, like a bug to a light, go for that fame light at the end of the tunnel. Like if you're thinking about quality or about the strength of your talent, you're actually making it harder for yourself. And part of the reason why your mom's comment is funny to me is I'm a little bit envious because I've ran a print magazine for the last 5 years in the year 2025, which is a bit of a novelty. So, but when people come up to me and ask, who is this for? It's not done with the tone of a loving but concerned mother. It's done with the tone of sort of curious contempt of why bother? Let me get back to
By the way, I'm a print subscriber of the New York Times, the New Yorker, and the Atlantic.
that was one of the things I was afraid we weren't going to get to, is just how incredibly wide read and how much of a thespian you are. So I'll just mention very quickly that JL also has a, I guess, a book club that consists of exactly one person or two people if I count your dog, Cookie. But you have a book club that covers a really wide variety of books, mostly American history. And you are a frequent reviewer, although not in text, but in the podcast format of the theater coming and goings in New York. So I think that's a part of you that we won't have time to get into today, but it's actually a quite prominent part of you. You have a
Well,
Patreon.
and I will say this, and I always tell people a joke. I'm like, on the rare times, sorry to be adult here, the rare times I dabble in porn, I also pay for that. That's how committed I am to supporting working artists and creators. I feel, I'm trying to get a local opera singer. He's a big deal, but he lives near me. I'm trying to get him on my podcast because I want to talk to him as much as you're hearing me talk about comedy. I went to the opera for like the second time in my life last year, and 2 cell phones went off. And I went
Oh,
to the ballet later that year because my girlfriend wanted to go to the ballet, and it was great. Even more than the opera, I was so impressed by the combo of like art and athleticism at the ballet. I can't remember if I've ever been to the ballet. And there were women filming and people talk like on their phones texting, and the ushers, were doing like, you'd think they were doing sprinting drills, on a basketball court. They were having to reprimand so many people. And that's contributes. I think it's relevant because when I say art is dead, you were nice and said art as we know it is dead. No, I think art is dying. Forget as we know it or knew it, because the respect for art is dying. If the creators of art cherish fame and algorithms over the art they're making, and if audiences go to plays wearing Crocs and texting throughout a show and not turning off their phones, and filming Lincoln Center Ballet when they've been told 10 times not to, when all these things are surrounding every aspect of art, when I can't go to a movie without being blinded by a dozen cell phones throughout, it is collapsing, the sort of giving over. I think there's a variety of factors at play, but there is a lack of respect for the art, a lack of just of respect for things that aren't necessarily monetizable, and a lack of willingness to give yourself over to somebody doing something, that you don't have to be part of it, that you can give yourself to what someone else is doing and appreciate it and get lost in that. You can't get lost because you're lost in your cell phone all the time. I think there are so many social and personal factors at play right now that I don't know when we come back from this, until it becomes cool or hip or a fad to be lo-fi and just, hey, I'm doing that new trend. I'm going to a concert at a cafe, or I'm going to see an unknown comedian this week. How crazy am I? Since TikTok told me that's the new challenge, is to see art and not make it about yourself. I think we're in a really, and sorry for cookie barking, my nephew just arrived, but I really do believe we're in a crisis point that doesn't feel like a crisis because we've never had more access to content and things to wash over us, but we're losing the connection and the respect for art and the people who make it.
Cookie is like your unofficial producer. So cookie barking is like my 10-minute warning. And I'll try to let you go as soon as possible. But you've touched on such a nerve here. And I have, in the questions I have, it's under this sort of title of responsibility of the audience. That's exactly what you're describing. But I got to be honest with you, from 9 out of 10 times when people hear that, there's something arrogant about that, because we live in a world now where to even suggest that the audience has a responsibility when it comes to an artistic experience smacks of elitism.
Well, just like, and I will take this to one step further because I think it's emblematic of where we are. And I can say this as an American for sure. We've treated taking your citizenship responsibly, being an informed citizen, caring and acting on behalf of others and not just yourself, as political liabilities. Kamala Harris ran on democracy is in peril, and all the pollsters said, well, that's a losing issue. So if democracy isn't an issue worth winning in the world's main democracy, first biggest democracy, not in terms of population, but you know what I mean, all other values will crumble under that as well. And I'm not saying there's a direct connection, but I think there is a correlation between a lack of social responsibility, a lack of collective caring that is trickling down to art. And I had a bit on one of my specials. It might be Tall Boy on you, which is available on YouTube also. But I have a bit about selling out. And I said, I feel like the Kardashians, not to throw them under the bus as the sole culprits, but really opened up a world like that reality TV and like reality family selling your sex tape and making an empire off of it kind of, I think, may have transformed a generation into saying like, well, selling out isn't a thing anymore. It used to be, but now everybody does commercials. Everybody's trying to monetize everything. And there's a cheapening, I think, of art and integrity and of knowing your lane and respecting the lanes. And, I joked about if Biggie were still alive, would he be doing, Pizza Hut commercials or whatever? But I just feel like we have a real thorough rot going on in society. And for me as a comedian, I'm focused on democracy as an American. And as a comedian, my focal point is what the hell's happening to comedy. But I see it in all walks of life, and I see it in all forms of art. And it's a very unsettling thought because art is, I get laughed at from friends for quoting, Dead Poets Society too much. But, John Keating in that movie says to his class something to the effect of, math, science, these are important things. These are the building blocks of life, but poetry, that's what makes life worth living. And I think we are really we're becoming oblivious to that, oblivious to what makes us human, and I think seeing AI content creators all of a sudden just shamelessly producing things in seconds and, I had a prompt that was kind of funny and they did the rest. I've likened it to sports where I said, if you could create a robot that could do everything Simone Biles does in the gymnastics gym, would you want to watch that? No. The cool thing is that a fellow human, somebody who shares the DNA and the evolutionary history of me, has taken what we do collectively as humans to this rare, unbelievable form, but there's still a connection because I'm human like her. So, but I feel this unbelievable awe in watching her do gymnastics. Of course, we could build a robot that could do gymnastics better than Simone Biles at some point. Why would that be interesting or in like make me excited? Similarly, if you hit a few prompts in a computer, why am I going to consider that great comedy? The person, the man or woman creating this scenario and this humor from the same matter and the same mold of clay, basically, that I have, but they're doing something so different with it that you just go, wow. We forget that human connection is why things are cool. It's not because, oh, I'm not like them at all. I could never. It's more like, I can't believe another person can do that. Wow. Not somebody made a thing that can do that. Like when a car goes 100 miles per hour, I don't go, man, I'm jealous. I wish I was a car. But when I see Usain Bolt run 27 miles per hour, I go, my goodness, I'll remember that for the rest of my life.
Most people who, still hold on to their sanity, at least creatively, feel the way that you feel and say exactly the words that you're saying or share the sentiment. And just while we're on this, I followed an orchestra to Tokyo this summer to cover and write about it. And the conductor of that orchestra, who's the conductor of the National Arts Center Orchestra of Canada, we had a conversation like this which I recorded in a hotel lobby in Tokyo. It was beautiful because this man feels to a T the frustrations that you're expressing right now. And what's hilarious is that he used the exact same analogy of sports. He used tennis instead of boxing. And he said, if there are two robots that are going back, and folks, you can go and listen to this. It's part of our Sotto Voce series that I'll make reference to. Is like if we had two.
And can you send me the link to that?
I absolutely will. I think so this conductor, unfortunately, is leaving Canada to Orange County. And I joked with him in Tokyo that he's going to fit in because he looks exactly like Gavin Newsom. So He's gonna have to say, "I'm not, in fact, Gavin Newsom." Thankfully, he's got a British accent, so it'll be a bit distinguishable. But his entire
Even bigger turn on for the ladies of California. Gavin Newsom with a British accent.
the British accent and actual left politics. Uh, I think Gavin's making a bit of a turn now. Recently, he's something. He got a visit from the ghost of the 2020 eight elections, and he's had a change of heart. But the conductor just made that exact same analogy that if we had two tennis players going back and forth that were robots and they could go 10 times as fast as humans, we wouldn't appreciate that because it's not human and it's not a person. Quickly, I think the point I was making is that a lot of people feel the way you feel, but no one ever complains the way you complain about it. And I gotta be honest with you, JL. At the beginning, listening to your podcast was excruciating. I had to
Sure.
my teeth through it because I was paying. Here's what I was like, I'm subscribed to your Patreon, so I was literally paying for your comedy. But at least 20 minutes of every episode, I had to be told how much of a useless fan I am because I don't support.
No. But then I correct and I say, not you guys.
You're right,
You're
okay.
listening to this paid content. I can't be talking about you.
But eventually, I'm like, that my cringiness when you start complaining about how audiences do not support the art that they enjoy is a learned flaw. Like, this is what people should be doing. They should be getting, if you're an artist out there and at the bottom of your soul, the way JL knows that you're putting out great work and it's being ignored or the algorithm is not responding to it, you have every right to complain, to be direct about the frustration. So I think that's another thing that honestly sets you apart from, because a lot of comedians feel the way that you do, by the way. I listen to a lot of podcasts, but they go about it in a very sort of coquettish, very, I'm going to have to look up what that word means because I don't want to offend anyone, but they just are not very direct about it and they don't own their space. Like for you to say I could fill up Rogers Stadium, it is a little bit braggadocious. But then if you look at your body of work, and if I attended that Toronto show, I'm like, yeah, this guy is right. He could fill out Rogers Stadium or Rogers Center. I don't go there often. So why shouldn't he get to say that? Hey, by the way, I could fill this if I was given the opportunity. One more thing on this. So you've just talked about the responsibility of the audience.
And then I try to, like, in a manic mode, like then make the podcast like 30 minutes of super funny stuff, like to make up for where I know what pit I know I've dug everybody into emotionally.
Yeah, I think collectively, though, your fans and listeners of your Patreon and your podcast in general, we're starting to get it that none of this is going to change if everybody just sort of bites the bullet and like nobody says anything. Like you have to sometimes state the obvious that, hey, by the way, as fans, you're kind of letting me down because I'm completely independent, right? So there is no magic studio in the background that if I don't make an X amount of money this month, they can subsidize that. It's literally a transaction between you and your fans. So I think people are starting to come on board, at least I've come on board quite a while ago in terms of how important it is for you to call a spade a spade. But what about the industry? Like you've just talked about the responsibility of the audience. What is the responsibility of the industry to protecting and cultivating talent? Because some of your credits you mentioned earlier, it's funny. The first time you mentioned your TV credits, you're like, yeah, I've got a few TV credits. I'm like, is this guy not going to mention the fact that he was on Billions, one of the biggest shows at least while it was on? You've been on the Late Show with Craig Ferguson, the Adam Carolla Show. You've done podcasts with Mark Maron, Howard Stern, etc. So you're not some, run of the mill, off the street comic, right? You've basically courted the industry towards a marriage that never happened. Right. So they kind of left you at the altar. So in that respect, what do you put down as to why that marriage was never consummated? Why the industry was not able to reward with access to certain things someone who clearly has the talent, has the work ethic, has the sort of lawyerly professional adult brain, by the way, because a lot of comics, I'm sorry to say, don't have that. Like, people go up there and make jokes for an hour and then they don't understand that there's a business side to building a career. You've shown that you've got that over and over. So my question here is, what does the industry owe in terms of protecting the profitability of talent rather than the clickability of content?
It reminds me of a thing years ago. I remember watching CNN one time and they were covering a Lindsay Lohan story a lot. And I even then, this is maybe like early in social media, so it wasn't like the way it is now. But I thought, I get that news stations have to make money and draw eyeballs, but news stations still have to give people their vegetables. In fact, news is supposed to be mostly vegetables with maybe a little cake at the end, sports and a funny, cute story. But we turned it into, what do you want to have for dinner, honey? Chicken nuggets and fries again for the 20th? Sure. We started feeding people what they wanted or what was hot instead of maybe the most important news. I feel like comedy club owners, I've thought this for a while, they have a tough job. I mean, first I start with comedy club owners. You can get to the industry, which I think now they just look at TikTok numbers. They might as well be replaced, I think, by an algorithm, agents at this point. It's sort of like we've done the analysis and the analysis began and ended with your TikTok following. So that was half a second of analysis we did. We'll sign you, we won't sign you. But comedy clubs are in a tough position because obviously they are a business and they are basically a bar or a restaurant. So those are not businesses known for, having gigantic profit margins. So they need to fill seats. And I get that. But there is sort of, you are also the stewards of the talent and you are the developmental pipeline. And the more TikTok and Real Housewives, TikTok influencers and housewives you put on stage that should be at best MCs or maybe middle acts, you will stunt the overall growth of the industry for a quick fix. And I know not any one individual comedy club can be responsible or asked to be responsible for nurturing the next generation of comedy. They're all individual businesses, but collectively, it just feels like ticket sales. You've got to educate comedy consumers a little bit. I remember I did a show with a comic who sadly passed away. He was a really nice guy, Australian comic named Jim Short. And I'd met him like in 2009. And then we happened to be paired up in Iowa in 2011. He was the headliner. I was the middle act. And the amount of people that came up to us after the shows each night, because it was like a 5-night run or 6-night run. And he said, they would say, wow, I just to be honest, I had never heard of either of you guys, but that was a great show. And that's always stuck with me because you want to cultivate that your comedy club, even if you don't know the people, you can trust that comedy club to bring you quality comedy. Now, I feel like we've lost that. And like I said, there's no easy answer. I can't go to like some club in Toledo and go, the fate of art is in your hands. You've got to book this funny guy nobody's ever heard of. Trust me, it'll all work out, because it might not. But there has to be more of a medium. And I feel like there's been a full capitulation to sort of algorithms, ticket sales, the end. And so there's no easy answer. And I think there has been, like I said, I think society and art, there's failures at every level. Excuse me. And so the comedy industry and clubs, I think still they bear some ownership of a problem that we all own.
All right, I'm going to wrap this up on politics, and I'll keep it short because I really have kept you absurdly long here. So, it's kind of funny that in the backdrop of this entire conversation, I am at the end of the day speaking to an attorney who has real responsibilities in the morning for people in the Bronx and people who need good representation in court. But that then led me to, or this leads me to the other trajectory of your career, even as the comedy trajectory is dying down. There's a congresswoman, I believe, in your district that is either running for governor or something else that's not in Congress. And please correct me because I'm sure I'm getting this wrong, but
she's right. She's the Democratic nominee for governor.
For governor, fantastic. If she wins, that opens up a Congress seat in your district, which you've considered running for in the past. If one could take one good thing from the Trump presidency, which I know is a sentence that I'm probably going to think of editing out, when I'm cutting this together. But if you could take one good thing from the Trump presidency is that this idea of something is too absurd to happen, you got to throw it out the window. So we live in a world where if you do decide to run for her seat, join Congress, I personally think you would win just based on your ability to communicate. Like if we just left it at that, your ability to speak to people one on one, but then speak to the masses is a combination that I genuinely, sincerely think would make for a good campaign. Which leaves me with the one. Then there's the politics, right? I know you're on the left, as you said earlier, but there's something that you've talked about that I couldn't leave this conversation without challenging, which is this idea of um, all this browbeating that people are doing of Democrats is destructive because the real problem here is what's happening on the right and with Trump. As you said earlier in this conversation, that every good thing that's ever happened in the United States, a Democrat.
I would say most
Most.
good things you can
Okay.
point to, especially in terms of big, significant policies or benefits to people.
So let me then leave you with this question. My sincere belief, and I want to articulate it because I believe the opposite of your belief is the opposition between Democrats and the left. So the Zoran Mamdani left is more consequential. This is what I believe is more consequential than the opposition between Democrats and Trump slash the right. And I will button this belief by just pointing to the example of Bernie in 2016 and also Bernie in 2020, where had the Democrats not quashed his run for president, had they allowed him to actually have a fair shot at getting that nomination, a lot of people who have a lot of data to back it up say that Trump would never have happened. So in that sense, what the Democrats can actually do a lot more damage based on their punching leftward than the right ever can do, because the right will do damage at like a basic wake me up 6 a.m. in the morning, I'm ready to do damage. But who lets that happen though is how much the Democrats are willing to stomp on their own people. Why? What disagreements do you have with that? And this idea of being left of center in a world where Zoran Mamdani is going full on left and winning doing so, how would that be a winning strategy, whether or not you run for Congress?
Without going issue by issue in everything you said, because I understand the general gist of what you're saying. Now, what I try to convey to people is, if I were in New York, I don't know who I would have voted for mayor. It would almost certainly have not been Cuomo, unlike my mom, who she's a Cuomo, Clinton, Kennedy. It's like the famous franchises. She loves the Marvel and DC franchises of the Democratic Party. But I would be happy to vote for Mamdani. Like that's and what I think, especially being in the circles I run in and in comedy especially, what I think I'm pushing back on just as much is it's fair game to dump and shit on corporate Democrats and say, you're not the party, you're stifling the left, but when you say you're not realistic, you're too far left, that's crushing the progressive movement. But when you take the sizable center left, more moderate Democrats and claim that they're destroying the party, that's not treated as a kind of equal, maybe because they've had more of the power in their hands. I understand there's an unequal balance in that case, but rhetorically, it's a civil war. It's not a beatdown. It's not a curb stomping of progressives. It's a centrist saying, shut up, you're too far left, you're ruining everything, woke, woke, woke. But then it's, get out of here, you boomers, you destroyed the shit, let us take it. You don't know what you're talking about. And I think that's, if not equal in power, rhetorically, I think there is more equality than people allow for in the Democratic Civil War. What I try to say, and I try to be mindful of this when I'm saying things, I gave money to Bernie in 2016 because I liked the message. I voted for Hillary Clinton in the primary because I thought she would be the better president and be the more efficient steward of government, given her accomplishments and experience, both as a senator, first lady, and Secretary of State. So I'm not like fuck the progressive movement. I'm sorry if I'm for
No,
cursing.
no.
I'm not screw the progressive movement. We've got to move to the center. I'm saying my real belief for the Democratic Party, and I seem to get very few friends willing to go on either side. I want to be a centrist in the Democratic spectrum, not a centrist that compromises with MAGA and Bernie in some sort of weird universe that doesn't really exist, but we need the savvy and the numbers and the wisdom and some of the know-how and political gamesmanship of the center left. And we need the energy and some of the radical options and beliefs on the far left, because we're not in the 1980s anymore, the 1950s, housing crisis, climate crisis. Like, these things demand some radical change. And Joe Biden, for all he was a centrist and he was old, he passed some very consequential, very strong, progressive backed legislation on some big issues. And my thing is to say, Democrats, let's have the fight. And then we have to come up, our 50.1% has to come up with a plan that we can all live with. And that means making some compromises. But like I said, a left compromising with left, not left compromising with MAGA, because like I've said before, 2 + 2 is 4. If somebody says 2 + 2 is 10, the compromise is not 2 + 2 is 7, because now you're just wrong in a different way. But I'm saying on the left, where everybody believes in some form of bettering society and making progress for people. I know that may be hard for some who hate Cuomo or hate Clintons, but the fact remains, all are on the side, for the most part, of moving things forward, either moving them very forward or a little bit forward. And if we can find a middle ground there, not a national middle ground, a Democratic left of center, whether it be far left or just barely left, some plan of action that we can all at least agree on, then you need 100% to just say, that's it. That's our plan. And we're going to take Congress. We're going to take the White House. We're going to implement that. We're going to show people that we're moving things forward. And that progress will beget more progress and hopefully more Democrats. And then you get those key majorities that can sometimes lead to things like Obamacare and the Voting Rights Act and the New Deal. But I think I will say this, I think blame in the Democratic Party. I'm not a both sides guy, but I think progressives often think of themselves as just purity martyrs to the evil corporate Democrat machine. And people like my mom, who I'm trying to get to vote for Mamdani, but I don't want to get into too much of a fight with an 81-year-old, 2-time cancer survivor. I'm trying to tell her, like, Mamdani won your party's nomination. Give him a shot. Things are really bad for people. If America could elect Trump allegedly on the price of eggs for everything he did, then people being evicted and having trouble housing themselves should be worth a shot for a radical without a history of sexual assault. So I think I hope that's sort of clear on Mamdani won the nomination. If I were in New York City, whether or not I voted for him in the primary, he would have my support and my vote. If Cuomo had won, same thing. Because I'm not having Curtis Sliwa as the mayor of New York, some weird beret, Republican Fox News stooge. So that's my political philosophy, which is the side of good has to come up with a good message and everybody has to get on board with it. And because the right is always there with 49.9% ready to fight good and progress and equality.
JL, thank you so much for doing this. I really can't thank you enough. This has been incredible. I have to let you go now. And good luck with everything you're doing. I think whatever it is, you're going to be special, as you've shown that you are special. So thanks again for doing this.
I appreciate it. This was a pleasure. Thank you.